Hi, my name is Shilpa Sharma, and I'm here from Trillium Gift of Life Network to train a group of organizations who are here today about how to educate the South Asian community about organ and tissue donation, how to overcome some barriers when it comes to talking to these communities, and how to bust some myths around organ and tissue donation.
Something, whatever it is, you probably don't think about donation until a very traumatic moment in your life, and so that's a very difficult time to think about something like this. That's why we in Ontario encourage people to register, because when a family knows that their loved one had registered, it's easier for them to make that decision. It's easier for them to say yes to donation. When we talk about organ and tissue donor registration is voluntary. Anyone who is 16 and older with a valid Ontario health card can register. It's not compulsory in Ontario. You can change your registration status. You can withdraw it at any time online or in a Service Ontario Centre. So it's not permanent. It's not that on November 15, 2012 you registered, that's permanent. That can be changed at any time. It's only disclosed at the time of death. So that's why the only time TGLN knows whether somebody is registered or not is when we get a call into our PRC and they essentially give us somebody's health card number because somebody is on their deathbed at end of life or kind of in the final moments. That's when we have access. We call the Government of Ontario and ask them this person's registration status so that we can let members of their family know. So when we talk about registration, it's as simple as going online and doing it or going to Service Ontario Centre. But the reality is we can't move ahead with donation unless we have family consent. So that means that we have people who work in hospitals across Ontario who approach families, every single family that's been flagged. We approach every single family and ask them for their consent. And so people often wonder, why do you have a registration database if you have to then go and ask for consent? The reality is, registration allows us to see how well we are doing from an educational standpoint. How well are people becoming educated in the province about organ and tissue donation? When you see an increase in registration rates, so in the last 10 years, the registration rate has doubled. People are talking about it more. You see more stories about it. You see more at events. People are coming forward and saying, I was a heart recipient, or my loved one, we donated their eyes and skin. When we hear more stories about this, that is reflected in the registration rate. We know that the growth means that people are becoming more educated about it. But probably more importantly, when you know that your loved one has registered, when you're approached in the hospital and you're told, Sylvia registered to be an organ and tissue donor, you know that decision is no longer yours. That person had already made that decision, and as a family, you know that this person came to that decision on their own. Most times people register and let their families know, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And so what we find is in situations where somebody was registered, they're 2 times more likely to go on and become a donor. They're 2 times more likely for us to get family consent. Does that make sense? So when we approach families in the hospital, and we approach every single family, when we go to a family whose loved one didn't register, and we go to a family whose loved one did register, the person whose whose loved one did register is more likely to say yes by 2 times the amount. So if you see the very last stat, 2016, 2017, 89% of the people approached whose a loved one was registered said yes, they consented, versus 49%. So it's nearly 2 times more, because they knew that that person had made the decision. It's no longer a decision they have to make in a traumatic moment of their life.
So is it necessary to get the family consent even if I register?
It's necessary by law. Yes,
By
it's
law.
necessary. So it's interesting. It's necessary for us to get family consent, or what they call SDM, substitute decision makers. So whoever's there, whether some people have made their lawyers their substitute decision makers, some people have made their family members. In South Asian communities, you find actually that even though the substitute decision maker may be a wife or a daughter, often in these communities you find a male member of the family who comes in and becomes the decision maker. Even though by law it could be the wife or the daughter or somebody else, often you find in our communities that gets negated because somebody else comes in and says, no, I'm the patriarch of the family and this can't happen. So that's a unique situation, I think, that we face, that some of our staff face in hospitals, that even though they technically need to get consent from here, the consent comes from someone else. Another unique thing that our staff find in hospitals is that in South Asian families, you have a lot of people who have come to see that person, and so you have cousins, aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, and all of them are your family. And so when it comes to having that discussion, it's difficult because we're technically only supposed to have that discussion with 2 or 3 close members of the family, but it suddenly becomes a large forum. So we're slowly trying to educate our staff, as well as trying to create a system where they understand who's the appropriate person to talk to. So there's a number of different barriers involved. Again, we kind of talked about, if consent is needed, why do people register? And we know that registration shows us that there's an increased acceptance and support for donation, and that people who are registered are 2 times more likely to go on to become a donor. So registration rates in the GTA. In Toronto, so our provincial average is 32%. In Toronto, so Scarborough, where I live, 15% registration rate, one of the lowest in the province. In North York, it's 17%. In Etobicoke, 22%, and then in the kind of downtown areas, it's hovering around that 33 to 35% mark. You probably can't see this, but I will send it to you. Essentially, this is just comparing what Toronto is like to the rest of the province, and this is in order of the registration rates. And you'll see that at the bottom most registration rates are the GTA, so Toronto, Mississauga, Brampton, Richmond Hill, Markham, Vaughan, areas that have a high concentration of South Asians, Chinese, groups that are populations that are less likely to register. That entire community is impacted because you have lower registration rates, and therefore lower access. You have less people who have access to those organs. And so you think, I live in a great city, I live in Toronto, there's millions of people here, millions of opportunities to get to receive a transplant, but the reality is the smaller communities where the registration rates are higher often have a better opportunity because more people have consented, there's more opportunity there. Hence the need to have these conversations to educate our communities. So how does the low registration rate impact the South Asian community? I sort of already mentioned this already. The 2015 survey found that South Asians register nearly a third less than the general population. Why does this matter? This matters because our communities also suffer and are in need of these organs, sometimes at a growing rate. So I know in the Indian community, in the Pakistani community, there's a larger rate of kidney disease than in the general population. My dad suffered from it. He needed an organ. He had a kidney transplant last year, but he was one of the oldest people in that hospital to receive it at the age of 75. And so he had needed this for years and years and years, but up until that point, nobody had ever explained to him what organ donation was, or when he heard about it, he thought, oh, no way, there's no way I want to be an organ donor, or I want to receive somebody else's organs. And he's like a very strict, he doesn't want to share his food, he doesn't want to share, if you drink out of something, he won't drink out of it. Even as a child, he never would. So the idea of getting somebody else's organs or giving away his organs was very strange to him until he needed it. So we know that our community is in need of these organs. People are probably not talking about it as much, but the need is there. And so that's why it's so important to get people to register, because you're more likely to match with, when it comes to your cells, your skin, all of that, your organ tissues, you're more likely to match with somebody who's within your, from your own ethnic background. So it's important for us to be registering to be able to provide those people with those gifts of life. So how can you help? This is really why we're here today. I would say just two things. Educate yourself and then inform others. Really simple. The basic act of having a conversation with somebody, there's no need to spend $75,000 on a marketing campaign if people aren't even going to consider what's on the screen, So those conversations at the temple, conversations in church, at the mosque, in the gurdwara, wherever you are, conversations at the dinner table, they make a difference. We have those conversations a lot more with our extended family because we were impacted by it. But I think if we had started having those conversations 15 or 20 years ago, it might have been easier to think about. But it's never too late. So 3 easy ways to get involved today. The first, I would say, is talk to a loved one. Just grab one person in your family or in your close friend circle and talk to them today about something you've learned. And register together if you haven't registered, or challenge and encourage them to register. Second way to be involved today is to tweet about this training using the hashtag #BeADonor. If you're on Twitter or if your organization is on Twitter, really easy to be out there on social media. The third way that you can get involved today is, if you're unsure, write down your questions. So I mentioned earlier that if you have questions, my preference in trainings is for you to write it down and to give it to me, because I like to be able to write the response out and to share it with everybody, because you don't know who else might have the same question and who could learn from your questions. But if you have any burning questions today that you absolutely can't leave unless they're answered, please do ask me. I'm here to help. What tools are available? So we have pamphlets available from religious perspectives. These were developed a couple of years ago, and so we're kind of in the process of looking at these to see how they can be improved. But we have pamphlets for the Hindu, Muslim, Catholic, and Sikh community, but are always open to suggestions about how those can be improved. I think the reality is, giving somebody a pamphlet isn't necessarily going to convince them, but having a conversation about it, and if they're interested in learning more, providing them with a pamphlet, encouraging them, telling them that there are faith leaders in their community who support this, is really a great way to start. We have brochures in different languages, including Tamil, Hindi, Punjabi, Urdu, Arabic. We have them in a dozen other languages, but I thought these might be the relevant ones for the group today. These are all available online and they can be downloaded. We can provide you with copies of them. So what you get when you download them online is something that looks like this, but you can kind of make your own brochure out of it. We can also provide them to you as well. What tools? So you also have staff, TGLN staff available to you. If you know community groups who want to have activities, we have a material request form online, and so we're happy to send whatever materials you need that we have available to us. So that could be brochures, that could be kind of pull-up banners, buttons, pins, things like that. So these are just a handful of things. Questions, please write them down. So I know we're running over a little bit, but why don't we just start this before we have a group of people, or not a group, we have 2 people coming in to talk to you about family services and advocacy. Before they come in, why don't I get you guys into pairs? How many people do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, why don't you guys do pairs, and then you can have one group of 3. So the next thing we're doing is essentially a myth busting session. I'm going to give each pair a page that has a myth on it. And what I want you to do is I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to essentially discuss this together. And what I'm looking for from you today is, can you suggest 2 ways to tackle this myth, knowing the communities that you work with, knowing the resources you have available, the platforms you have available. So what's one easy way that you can combat this myth? And what's one longer, big, dreamy way to combat this? So one could be a quick, easy way to do it. One could be more of a longer term way to combat the myth.
So you want us to group up 3 people each?
So I'm going to give you a paper that has a myth on it, and then I want you guys to come up with one easy way to combat this that you think you could do in your community, and then one maybe larger way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I would say 2, and then maybe you guys can be, either you can join these 2 or these 2.
Whatever. I can join across the
Whatever's easier. It might be easier. Why don't you guys, so we'll start the conversation. I'll give you guys 10 minutes to have that conversation, 5 to 10 minutes.
I just want to ask, like,
Yeah,
so
of
you
course.
South District thing that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on one way to educate the community, smaller groups, and then one way to do the larger groups.
So, I mean, that's a great suggestion. You could do it that way. What I was saying was, if you're coming up with 2 ways to bust this myth, what's one quick and easy way you could do it today? And what's a bigger, more long-term way that you could do it? Does that make sense? So you can think about it with your family, you can think about it with a larger audience. I'm kind of leaving it up to you. I didn't want to be too specific because people have such different things that I'll leave it up to you. And then kind of within the group, we'll share these together. These are directly coming out of the 7 most common myths that we get both within the South Asian community as well as within the Toronto general public. They're pretty similar, the types of myths and barriers that we see. So I'll give you about 5 to 10 minutes to have that conversation, and then we'll kind of present them after the 2 people come in. Okay. sorry to interrupt. So Iona and Michael are here. Why don't we take 10 minutes, a 10-minute break to chat with them, and then we can come back to this as well and complete that session.
As you can see on the screen, my name is Michael Ward, and I'm the Family Services Advisor for Trillium. And what that means, and usually I'm explaining that in a nutshell, is that Family Services, which is embedded into Trillium, is the group of people who, at the point of consent, have been transferred the donor family to our care. So what that means is, once the clinical side is over in the hospital setting, then it's our responsibility to make sure that that donor family is just not felt like they've been left. You know, thank you for the donation, and that's the end of the relationship. So we do say at consent, because what that really means is they at that point have said, yes, we want this to happen, and it makes sense to us, and we want to be able to support them on that journey. So moving forward from that, they will receive a letter from us in our Family Services Department, which talks about the outcome. And really what that means is what organs went where in a very high level disclosure, in that we can say adult male, adult female, young, but we can't describe, because it is an anonymous process, and through the Privacy Act we have to be very discreet in how we explain that to them. Yet it's important for donor families to know where the gifts have gone. So in that letter we describe that piece and introduce ourselves, in that they will be hearing from us as the months go forward. So that also speaks to the year that they will be in our sites. And so from that outcome letter, we then reach out to them again at 3 months, sort of a check-in, and then at 6 months offering them an opportunity to see how the recipients are doing. So we would make a request into the transplant centers through the recipients' coordinators as to how they're doing. And we get, again, just a little bit of information. Sometimes it's not always good information, but it's the transparency around how the recipient is doing, excuse me, and if they're still alive. So there is that reality piece as well. Thankfully, it's not conversations that we have very often, but there has to be a person and people within our organization that deal with that directly with the donor family, so that it's handled well, which is part of that support piece. We then touch base with them again on the anniversary of their loved one's death, just so that acknowledgement is made and that we're still thinking about them, because without them we wouldn't be doing the work that we do here. Now, in the middle of that introduction in the 12 months, there is also opportunity which happens often by the initiation of the recipients, where they will reach out to their donor family by way of a letter, and those letters are anonymous, so they can't say who they are and where they live, but they can certainly say, I'm your son, or I'm your daughter, I'm your mother's liver recipient or kidney recipient, and I just want to thank you, for the gift. And they often express the condolences, and you can imagine just the emotion that's around that for donor families. So we try to support them through that process, and if they choose to write back to the recipient, which a lot do, it starts that engagement of years, literally, of a relationship that's just based on anonymous letter writing, and it's quite wonderful to see. And I brought a sample letter with me, so I want to read it to you, just so that you get a sense of the level of emotion that's in it. This isn't a heavy letter, but at the same time, you can imagine, as a recipient who's been on the wait list and facing death, gets a phone call and now they're not. So they write, Dear donor family, I give thanks every day from the day of receiving this precious gift from your beautiful loved one. Without this decision, I would not have the opportunity for a second chance to live. With all my heart, thank you is not enough to express my gratitude for the gesture of love. Sorry for taking too long to answer your letter, but it has been difficult for me to say with words the appreciation for that beautiful member of your family. I want to tell you, from the moment the transplant took place, the liver is functioning marvelously without complications of rejection. The organ has tolerated the anti-rejection medication miraculously. Everything has gone so well that in the end of this year, I resumed my duties at my employer on a part-time basis. By May, I was working full-time, and at the moment of writing this letter, everything is going well, and my quality of life has been good through service and spending time with loved ones. Let me tell you a little about myself. I like to meet people, and in serving my community of different cultures, and to be kind and gentle with those that I have interactions with in my life. Over 30 years ago, I came to Canada from India and have made a life here. I enjoy watching sports, growing vegetables in my garden, and have been active in my community for roughly 30 years. For everything, I am giving thanks to my donor and their family. My prayer is that I will continue to bless others, and as you have said, your loved one would have been pleased to help others in this amazing way. This gift has blessed me. Respectfully and with warmth, your liver recipient. So that gives you an indication just of the impact and the emotion that kind of runs through our department. And I think, as many others would say, we get the luckiest job in the world because we really get to see it at play. Additional to that role, we also, even though we're switching gears in a new way as to how we do this, and I brought this with me. Each donor family will receive a medal from us, so I'll pass that around so you get a chance to see it. So moving forward, every donor family, organ and tissue will receive a medal within a very short time following the donation process, and just our way to be able to honor their loved one as a keepsake for them to have for a long time moving forward.
Thank you. So one of the things I didn't mention to the group, and so you kind of mentioned it, Michael, was that donation is anonymous, and so the recipient they don't know the name of the person who donated to them. So in this letter, you see evidence of that. We have to kind of keep donation anonymous. As an organization, we can't reveal who the donor was or who the recipient was, but we can facilitate the communication between them. So they'll send a letter which will reach us. We will then be able to send that to the person. Now, with social media and just media these days, people have, we've found recently people find each other. They just get either they read it in the paper or they see something on social media that says, somebody said my loved one donated, blah, 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 and this person will get a letter to say, you received a kidney from a 15-year-old female, and then they'll go through the news and, people are connecting the dots, but that's something that by law we're not allowed to provide. And so you see in the letter, it's completely anonymous. We can't give details of where this, if somebody writes into us and puts a name in or says something about being a father or an uncle or writes where they're located, we have to take kind of those specific things out. But I just wanted to mention that because I don't think I had mentioned that to the group.
So even if, like, as a recipient, I wish to reach out to the donor family, I can't. But through other means, because I heard a couple of stories on CBC,
Yes.
where like people connected and they were like very emotional reunion matters. And back in India,
Yeah.
I have seen like there's a Afghan person who lost his hands. He got donation from a Tamil person,
Right.
and there was a reunion done. So I think legally, A, it's not a very organized practice there, and B, like therefore it's not regulated by law either.
Yeah, and sometimes people do it on their own. We've had situations in Ontario, kind of you mentioned CBC, recently we had a situation where a heart recipient was able to connect the dots to who the donor was, and those two have connected recently, but it's not something that we, by law, can...
We don't confirm or deny it, even though we know they've actually made the connection. And once a letter has exchanged hands both ways, you could take this letter, the donor family could from the recipient and post it on a Facebook site or something like that and say, here's the letter, and it wouldn't take much for a recipient to go, that's the letter I sent you, and then it's automatic.
Yeah.
So that's the proof, and for them that's a connection. But we can never say, yeah, you're right. We just have to say, well,
Yeah.
moving forward.
What if both families want to connect?
Still not allowed under the Privacy Act, which is interesting, and we answered this question all the time because within the province of Ontario, the adoption laws are different than that. So they fall under a very similar category that if both parties are willing, there's an ability to facilitate that. But under our act, which is the Trillium Gift of Life Network Privacy Act, which is separate from the Privacy Act, it specifically states that we can't make that connection.
Sorry, so like they're not allowed to connect. However, like let's say if I receive a connection, will I know like who it came from, like the name of the person?
You won't know a name or their or age or where they lived, but you would know whether it was an adult male or an adult female.
Do you have any time? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do you have any timing for consent? Any consent in the hospital?
Sorry, any.
Any specific timing to get the consent, or the consent process? Is it after deceased or?
So consent timing can be depending on the stability of the donor. So we'll talk about them as in clinical terms as a patient. I think, is that what you're asking? So when
Yeah.
that time occurs. So sometimes with a traumatic head injury, there's an ability to sedate and keep that patient stable. Once that starts to tip, then things start to move a little quicker. So if the brain death has been established, then moving forward, it's up to our coordinators as tactfully as they can to expedite the process as they're talking with a family. And if for example, the potential donor was a registered donor, that makes that conversation a little bit easier because the family already understand those were the wishes, and so the expedition is understood, even though more difficult, because what that really means is you're going to have less time to say goodbye to your loved one, because if we don't move quicker and have consent from you, we might lose them altogether. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
Yeah.
Just one more question.
Uh-huh.
So like, okay, so let's just say like, if I know that I'm going to, I have a life-threatening illness and I'll pass away, can I make a choice to donate my heart to somebody in the family? Because if they're in the wait list,
Right.
that might never happen, but
Right.
it'll be quicker, right? That way.
Well, it can be. I don't believe that specific allowance is there. I know that it has been asked, but if the algorithm or the matching doesn't match in your family, then it wouldn't matter. Then the organ needs to go to the sickest and the match. So it's like that perfect storm. But I certainly know that people will say, and it has happened. I wouldn't say that it's common.
Really good questions.
I was just wondering, like, if I, as a potential donor, hear the stories of those people who received donors and how it impacted their lives, I'll be probably more convinced than because those people who donated and they are no more, because their stories are difficult to access and therefore consequently blackmail. So I don't know how law fares on that.
Well, certainly you having the opportunity to hear real life, when an individual is standing in front of you who is on, death's door and then isn't, is very impactful to your decision to register. Equally is speaking to a donor family who walked the walk to get there, to actually, in a very short time frame, understand that their loved one is gone, and that they have the opportunity to create a legacy for their loved one. And I think that is equally motivating for people to register as donors as well, because it's like, if they can say yes, how can I not say yes?
that's actually a great transition to Iona and her role, because I think that's one of the reasons for us coming together is to try to get people to share their story. You're right. When you hear from somebody who has actually received or whose family donated, that has a greater impact than me or the president or the prime minister standing in front of you, or you know, Shah Rukh Khan or whoever it is standing in front of you telling you should do it. You know, meeting somebody who's actually been impacted by it either way and can tell you a compelling story. And the reality is, we don't always have enough of those people in our communities who are telling those stories. They exist, but they may not come forward to tell their stories or to be involved. And so part of us getting together today is, as we go out and talk within our organizations, is to find those people and to encourage them, to tell them that their story is valid and to encourage them to talk to us about it. And it's a good transition to Iona.
I have just one semi-clinical
Yep.
question for Mike. Is there any donor, any organ which can be redonated? Like if I donate my heart and it's been used for say a few years and that person can further donate? I mean, I don't know.
It has been done. It's rare, but it often, as you can imagine, has more to do with the time between the first transplant and if that patient makes it. But yes, they have retransplanted.
So it's possible.
Livers are probably the most resilient organ to do that with.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
I think it's my turn to step out of the spotlight, which is very difficult for me, but I'll have to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so this is a perfect transition. Although it might be challenging to find some of those people to tell their stories, to encourage people to register, I'm pleased to say that our advocate program is based on the fact that we do have several people across Ontario who are already doing that. And so I manage and run programming to support these advocate groups, and we have about 24 currently across the province that are out there talking to people about their experiences, talking about the myths. I think you did that before we came in. And most of them are made up of either recipients, so they've had that journey where they've almost lost their life and had that moment of receiving the life-saving gift. And so they can discuss that with a group, and that impact, as Michael said, it comes across so much more strongly than if it's just a representative from TGLN or someone who believes in it. And of course, there are some donor families also as part of these groups as well, which is fantastic, because as again was said here, if someone can go through that process of losing a loved one and still make that decision to save the life of a stranger, then everyone should be able to do it. So although the majority of our groups are made up of recipients or donor families, there is an example. We have a great one. If you're familiar with the Amar Karma group, and we just went to their gala event a couple of weeks ago. And this was a woman who heard a story, probably a recipient or donor family talking about it on the news, or she read it in an article. No connection to the process herself, but it just touched her so much, and she felt that, wow, look at this exists. This information I wasn't even aware of before. I can sign up and potentially save someone's life in the future. So I want to gather a group of people together who also believe in life-saving opportunities, and then Amar Karma was born. And so, but I don't believe that any of the founding members, they may have, because they've been around for 8 years now or more, have recipients or donor families may have joined that group, but it was all just based on, a very altruistic desire to save a life because she could and because they could. So it's a great example. So as Shilpa's given me the list of some of the organizations that you are representing here today, so even if nobody in your group has been touched by this, this is information that you can share. And so, I'm going to sit.
Yeah,
That's okay,
yeah,
just
please.
because,
I
don't need the standy spotlight like Michael done. Just because I have some information that I brought to share with you that might help break this down a little bit, and you can review this on your own. This is an orientation package that I share with anyone who comes forward. Maybe if you want to take one and pass it down. Anyone who comes forward to TGLN and connects with me with an interest in advocating on behalf of organ and tissue donation awareness. So maybe just grab them and pass them down. My business card is there as well. There's a lot of information in here that I won't be able to get through in complete detail, so please feel free to reach out to me, either email or phone, and we can discuss anything that's not clear. But I think this just gives a good sense of, did everyone get one? Is there enough? Because I got more here. This will just give you a good sense of what our advocates receive upon reaching out to us, and then I can talk about the support that I can provide. So in general, we want to give a little, because you've already asked some great questions here about the clinical aspect of it, so there is information in this orientation package about what exactly can be donated, organ tissue versus, organ donation versus tissue donation, and some stats like, you're probably more likely going to need an organ than going to be able to donate one. And that's something that most people don't know. So there's just some information in here to get all of our advocates on the same page so that when you are out in the community or working with your coworkers, you're giving the correct information and everyone's got the same message. So a couple of, just the first piece of this here, some of the stats that I'm sure Shilpa's already gone over, some of the basic stats, maybe not. So everyone is a potential donor, right? That's how we see it and that's what we believe. One individual organ donor can save up to 8 lives and enhance the lives of 75 others through tissue donation. So that's a message that often resonates really strongly with the public. In addition, every 3 days, someone in Ontario dies while waiting for a life-saving transplant. So that lands with people quite strongly. So there is a list here of a couple of the key programs that we offer at TGLN. The Community and Advocate Support Program is what I'm reviewing with you right now. Michael's already chatted with you a little bit about donor family services. We also are always trying to reach youth, and that's sort of part of my mandate, but has been a separate entity in itself leading up. We sometimes have some difficulty with that because the best way to reach the kids is in schools, and trying to break through some of the admin of connecting with the school board and getting a champion on site who will help support this has been a little bit of a challenge, but we do have a program called One Life Many Gifts. And another great example, Amar Karma, they had at the event that we went to had something like 15 very engaged youth advocates at their as part of their program, which was extremely inspiring to see. So I'm really looking forward to following up with a bunch of those kids. So as I mentioned already, we go through some of the information about what exactly can be donated. The organ donation pathway, which Mike touched on a little bit here. And then I think this is probably covered in the myths, just the importance of recognizing how donation is allocated, right? So that's something that we really want to try and tell people who are learning about organ and tissue transplant for the first time. So again, a few more stats here. Now, as we get to the TGLN Advocate Support piece, this page here where my picture is on there as well as a few other folks, you'll see Shilpa there too, and Gracinda and Meredith. These are the 4 main people that will be able to support you in any advocacy work that you're wanting to do. We also offer several materials that you can access, and that's through an online form that we have. And so there's things like the green ribbon like I'm wearing today, brochures, we have handheld signs that you can take selfies with. We've got lots of social media stuff that you can share with your team, with your networks. So, and we've just recently launched a new campaign, so that's really exciting as we come into April and Be a Donor Month. So you'll see a lot of that will be coming your way. Also, so when I refer to the 24 groups that we have out there, they're quite independent. So anyone who is looking to form an advocacy group really is taking on the responsibility of a tiny little grassroots organization within themselves. So they are, as I said, across the province, so they know their own communities, they know their own areas, they have connections with like political leaders, MPPs, mayors, and they're always doing their best to connect with these folks to help spread the word. And so how they choose to do it is really up to them. So many people will do things like organizing walks or runs. They have tables at different events where there'll be thousands of people coming through that they can hopefully attract attention and bring people over to give them some information. And so if you are, representing an organization today, it's a wonderful opportunity for you to connect with not only the staff that you're working with, any of your clients, any of the people who are connecting with your organization. And of course, this can be done in any newsletters that you send out, on your own social media channels, if it can be part of the conversations that you have with the people that you interact with, and we encourage all of that. I also put out a monthly advocate bulletin, which gives anyone who's interested updates on any kind of TGLN messaging that we want to help share with the public. We have a photo album and information about what the advocates across the province are doing, so you can get some ideas, you can see who's who. We have different stories about advocates and the great work that they're doing. In fact, today we are launching the first award ceremony for a community-nominated Advocates in Action Award. So these are the kinds of things that we'll be sharing, and these are the stories that we want to share with the community to really inspire people to register and think about organ and tissue donation.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if you have any questions now, I've got a few minutes, but as I said, my business card's here. I know it's a lot of information. Feel free to reach out to follow up with anything, and I'm happy if you are thinking that you want to start a campaign of some kind or something within your organization or in your community, please let me know and I'm happy to help you get started. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you guys. There's sandwiches coming. You guys are welcome to.
I may take you up on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There'll be a lot actually because I think we have even take some back. So we know, I know it's a lot of information today, and by no means do I expect you to go out and know the answers to everything. My dad had an organ transplant last year, and I've worked here for the last 2 years. There's when you think about organ and tissue donation, you think, okay, how complicated could it actually be? And I realize I talk about this every day, and there's so many questions I still can't answer. And the answers to some of the questions are constantly changing because policy changes, because research changes. And so one day something that was not possible could be completely possible the next day. And so, you know, I just want to say to you, as you're thinking about this, don't worry about knowing every single stat necessary. You just need one piece of information to start a conversation with everyone. So we have a couple of minutes before the sandwiches come, and I just wanted to do the myth busting activity. Do you guys need another 5 minutes to discuss, or do you guys want another 5 minutes?
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
You guys are good? Yeah, if you guys are superstars. I'll give you another couple of minutes to come up with your 2 answers, and then we'll go around and you can tell everybody your myth and what your suggestions are. So the first myth we actually have on here, I didn't give out to anybody because we had already talked about it. One of the things that we often hear is time. I don't have time to register. So when we talk about the 80% of people who are interested, but the fact that there's only 32% who have actually registered, many of those people come back and say, I do not want to go to a Service Ontario Centre. It is the worst experience. And the reality is it takes less than 2 minutes to register online. You can go to beadonor.ca. 90% of people who register go to a Service Ontario Centre because they think that that's the only way. But you can register online, you can register on paper. So if you go to our website, you can register on paper and mail that form in. So it literally, if you go online, it's something you can help your community do as well for people who aren't comfortable going online. It literally takes 2 minutes, not even. If you have, all you need is your health card and you register. So it's pretty straightforward. No need to go to a Service Ontario Centre. I understand not wanting to go into them, but it's super easy. The second one we had was, which pair had the immigrant one?
I think we.
Okay, so would you like to read it?